Charlie Kray and his twin brothers were once professional boxers. Born in London's East End, they knew they'd have to fight to make their name. In 1951, they all appeared on the same bill at the Royal Albert Hall. Charlie Kray lost his bout. Reggie won easily and skillfully. Ronnie lost his temper and was disqualified. From early childhood, the identical twins were bound by bitter rivalry and fierce devotion. Their conviction for assaulting a policeman ended their mother's hopes for a boxing career for her sons. Their family believed it was fate that turned them into heavyweight gangsters.
You see, that's where it all began from when they were children, really. I mean, when it was boxing, they were very, very good. They won everything. People thought if I could beat Reggie and Ronnie, even when they were children, then we'll have a name. And they never did win. So they kept winning, and as they got older, the same thing happened. People wanted to put the twins back on the floor. And so as it went on, it got worse, obviously, the violence, and they kept winning. And that's how it all began. They wasn't looking around to be Jack the Lads or be villains. It happened.
Ronnie and Reggie grew up in the post-war East End with its tradition of street violence and strong sense of community. The twins used both to increase their power. They bought their mum a local pub. The Krays worked hard to appear as local boys made good, but they were murderers and extortionists. They made sure cameras were on hand to help them gloss over the dark side of their activities. The twins killed people in cold blood, but the images that remain in the public's mind are of Ronnie and Reggie giving money to charity, of Reggie posing with the stars, of Ronnie hobnobbing with politicians like Lord Boothby, and the twins immortalised by the fashionable photographer David Bailey. But in the underworld, the twins were known for what they were, and as in their early boxing days, their reputation preceded them.
Obviously, once you start getting a reputation, I mean, you stand on Bow Corner, you got the reputation as a game boy. So you get someone down from Roman Road crowd, Stratford, and Poplar, and you have a battle there, or you go and visit Mile End, or whatever, same thing. To be told that their twins are taking that, was the sort of, wow, something to be proud of. It could have gone either way. I went the wrong way.
Big Albert Donahue joined the firm after one of the twins shot him in the back of the leg. This was after the Krays had branded a friend of Albert's on the face with an electric poker. It was a punishment for some perceived slight against the twins, and when Albert dared to speak his mind, he became their next target.
Jewish guy, so he's got a blue chin anyway, and he hasn't shaved because he's got these, he's been branded with electric poker, you know, these wire lighter things. And we were trying to get it out of him who done it, but he wouldn't say who done it. So in the end I got fed up with him. I said, well, if somebody done that to me, I'd blow their head off. And that was it. I walked away. If I'd known it was Ronnie, I wouldn't have changed my mind. I'd changed my mouth. You know, I wouldn't have said it. As soon as I walked in the pub, someone said, here he is. And everything sort of hushed, you know. I stood at the bar, got a bottle of light ale, and in them days you always kept the bottle because it's an innocent weapon. And I felt these people drifting away from me, and I thought, oh shit, it's off now. And then bang! I turned round, and there's the other guy going like that with an automatic pistol.
Albert refused to tell the police which twin had shot him. This made him worthy of joining their firm.
They said that when your leg's better, come and work with us. In the meantime, we put you on a pension. I think it's 15 quid a week pension, which was, I suppose at the time, near enough average week's wages. So that was it.
That was the moment you were on the firm?
Yeah. Signed up.
Albert Donahue became a soldier at Fort Valence, the nickname for the Krays family home at number 178. Like much of the East End, it's now been demolished, but even in its notorious heyday, it hardly resembled the fortress of Ronnie's fantasies. Here, he and his brother held court and presided over the firm's board meetings. From the front room of the 2 Up, 2 Down, they ran a criminal empire. The first time he set eyes on Ronnie, it was obvious to the policeman who was eventually to jail the twins that he was playing the part of an American gangster.
It was a summer's evening, and I realised that a car had drawn up immediately outside the door and looked outside. It's a big American type car, and a guy stepped out of the car, put with his hand in his pocket as though he had a gun in his pocket, and he sort of swept the street, looking up and down and making sure that there was no one inside, and then gave a signal, and the back door opened, and out stepped Ronald Kray. And I was amazed because he was dressed for all the world like a 1930s Chicago gangster. He had a long, long cashmere coat that reached to his ankles, tied in a loose belt at the waist. His hair was greased and parted, and he wore his glasses, and then he swept across the pavement and into the pub, and he looked to me like Al Capone without his fedora.
Many were prepared to obediently follow the Kray twins' lead, but those were the days when the stands at Hackney Dog Track were packed with punters. Now a few loyal supporters remained, among them Tony Lambriano, clinging to the values of an age when the odds were stacked in favour of villains, and no one stopped to think about the consequences. Lambriano's loyalty cost him his liberty. He spent 15 years inside for his part in one of the Krays' murders.
When you talk about fear, what is fear? It's an imagination of something. That's what fear is. I've seen frightened people, yeah. I mean, we've all done it. Every one of us has terrified someone in some way. But I think we saw it as a way of like earn a living. I mean, you can go and go to a lawyer, for example, to solve a problem. But if you went to someone like the twins, their word was enough. I mean, the problem ended. It's proved time and time again. Their name was enough. They didn't need a firm. There was a firm, and the two of them on their own. They never need the firm. You see, the twins had to live up to this reputation. Bear that in mind. And what I mean by that is, what people want them to be, they had to be, I suppose, if I look back on it that way. So they had to be good at whatever they'd done, and believe me, they were good. The best I ever saw.
Well, I was known as Reggie's man. I mean, he didn't use words like minder, bodyguard, that sort of thing. Just, I was Reggie's man.
Did you have lots of money in your pocket?
Well, apart from the twins' pension, if you did any business with them, if you actually went on a bit of business and there was money involved, you got a slice of that. Plus I could eat and drink for nothing, and I could get my clothes made to measure next to nothing. You needed a car, you just went to a car site and frightened the governor and pulled one off the front for a couple of weeks and run it into the ground. Hardly any expenses. I was then put in charge of collecting the weekly payments from different clubs and places. And from that I would pay out the pensions. I'd be told who to pay. And if somebody was out of favour, they wouldn't get paid that week. You know? There was no fabulous fortunes and thousands of pounds. You know.
Protection was one of the firm's main sources of income. People paid up because they were afraid. The twins couldn't afford to let their reputation for violence slip. That reputation usually ensured that their victims didn't complain to the law. Detective Inspector Nipper Reed had to sit back and wait for witnesses who would dare to speak out against the gangsters. In 1965, some 3 years before he finally arrested them, he thought he had a breakthrough. London club owner Hugh McCowan complained to the police about the protection racket. The twins were charged with demanding money with menaces. They wanted 50% of the profits from his club, the Hideaway. The people who knew the twins and their methods were not surprised when they were acquitted after witnesses retracted their evidence.
There's no question about what prevented witnesses giving evidence to suggest that the Krays were involved, and that was terror. Just absolute fear and terror, because the Krays generated that by their threats, by intimidation and by their violence. People were openly saying, they won't be in long, they'll get away with it, they'll get out. And so it happened. This gave them even more confidence, even more arrogance, even more certainty that they were the kings of the underworld in the East End and that nothing could change that.
This is BBC Television.
The twins used the press to capitalise on their release.
How much does this trial cost you?
It's cost us roughly £8,000.
And how do you feel about that?
I don't feel any I like the idea to spend that money for no reason for me.
Does it leave you broke, or how does it leave
It doesn't leave us broke, but at the same time it's a lot of money to have to pay out when one is innocent, you know.
A lot of people have got the impression from this trial that Clubland, London, is very tough. Do you think it is? You run a couple of clubs.
In the East End, the twins' victory over the law only increased their power to dispense their own vicious brand of justice.
You knew if you were doing wrong, and you knew if it warranted some sort of comeback. So you were expecting it. And I know cases where people were upset when they didn't get seen to, because it made them feel small, insignificant. You know. Scarf, chip mark, they would wear them with pride. You know, look at me, I've got a cut. It was a sign that you were a tough guy. First of all, the guy would be kidded to, made to feel easy. All right, what are you drinking, that sort of thing. Then one would walk away from him that way, one would walk away from him that way. And then when everything was right and everybody was out of the way, they would just spring the guy. Zip. He's cut. They don't feel it, that's the first thing they do, is they look, they see the blood. And a lot of people, because they're bleeding, they're beaten. Other people, they get angry when they see their own blood, you know. But most people, as soon as they think they're bleeding, they go, whoa. Especially when they coupled with the opposition, of course, you know.
Come on, everybody, tonight is party night at the Astor Club. Come on! Enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. Enjoy yourself. Why you're filling the year.
In the 60s, crime was tinged with glamour. Celebrities and villains rubbed shoulders at the Astor Club, just off Berkeley Square. But violence was never far beneath the veneer of respectability. One night at the Astor, the chief henchman for the rival Richardson firm, Mayor Frankie Fraser, was entertaining the fugitive Scottish murderer Jimmy Boyle. Insults were traded when Kray associate and bank robber Eric Mason arrived on the scene.
And I walked in with these two friends of mine, and one of the Scots guys said something about my friend's broken nose, and my friend knocked him out. And all hell was let loose then, so the Richardsons, Fraser and all that felt that they had to make one against us because of their showing discourtesy to their friends from Scotland, and that's how it started. So all of a sudden a few knives come out, axes and one thing and another, and I jumped in, pulling people off my pal.
Police were called, got out the back door and bumped into Mason outside on the pavement. And he said, Reggie and Ronnie won't be pleased with what's happened here tonight, which was nothing to do with me or with them for that matter. And with that I just bundled him in the car and kidnapped him.
Was he injured at all?
Well, if he wasn't injured, then he must have been the Invisible Man. Of course he was injured.
How?
With a chopper.
Injured where?
Round the head, everywhere.
They overpowered me and got me into this workshop where Fraser pulled a chopper and hit me on the head with an axe. So I put my hand up, and my hand, and that scar there, my hand was pinned to my head. So I couldn't move the hand. And they tried to chop that hand, and you see them scars there, that's where they tried to chop the other hand up. And they were making remarks, he won't ever fight again. You know what I mean?
He really got what he deserved. And that day he wasn't a bad fellow as it happened. So, you know, in that sense, he never went to the police afterwards or anything like that. No, or anything. But on that particular night, he was bang out of order.
Well, I thought I was dead, you know what I mean? I see lights and all that. I must have been come to with lights in the operating table or something, because I had 370 stitches, 3 fractures in my skull, and I was in a pretty bad state.
Mason and Fraser's fight took place as the underworld was bracing itself for all-out war between London's 2 major firms, the Krays and the Richardsons. This never happened because in March 1966, the Richardsons got involved with a local gang in a gunfight at the Mr. Smith's club in Catford. 1 man was shot dead. As a result, most of the Richardsons were either under sedation or under arrest.
The Richardsons were now broke up. Some were in hospital, some were in Nick. Cornell was a loner, and he's come over to our territory. It was an insult. Ronnie took it as an insult. To us, Cornell was a finished man. He was beat. He had no backup, you know. Any one of us would have faced him in a pub, but he wouldn't have come to killing the man. There was no reason to kill him.
George Cornell was the only key member of the Richardsons' firm still on the loose. He was a violent man who'd taken part in their torture sessions. He crossed the river into Kray territory to drink at the Blind Beggar pub. Legend has it that he'd called Ronnie Kray a fat puff. What's certainly true is that Cornell was afraid of no one. The pub was less than a mile from Fort Valence. Cornell was with his friend Albie Woods, who now talks publicly about that night for the first time.
The pub was completely empty. There wasn't a soul in there. So we walked right the way along the long bar, and as it bends round at the end, there's a petition there, and there's curtains by the petition which led into the public pub. Jules sat in the corner, you know, we were back towards the petition. I sat on the corner, facing him.
The underworld grapevine was quick to inform Ronnie Kray of an enemy presence on his manor. He set off with his driver and a 9mm Maus automatic.
5 minutes went by, or maybe 7 minutes. All of a sudden, George said, look who's here. Then I realised that someone had stopped behind me. George was sneering at him. And at that instant, bang, the shot was fired. All I could see was one massive, big, flame of smoke sort of thing, like, blue. Couldn't see yours then, Then I slid off my stool, just ducked behind the bar, and then down he came. He wasn't unconscious, he was still conscious, he was sort of moaning. So I was just saying to him, all right, George, I'm with you, and I put a cushion underneath his head, you know, made it sort of make him comfortable. He had a hole in the face and it was pumping out onto me, you know, just pumping all the time. And I didn't see any other, you know, wounds or anything, like, you know. I was wearing a blue mohair suit with a collar and tie. And when I looked at myself, I was absolutely saturated in blood. And I just took the coat off, put it on the seat, and jumped in my car and drove to the first telephone box that I came to phone his wife, Ronnie.
All the police were able to get on the night was some scene of the crime photographs. Albie Woods maintained he didn't see the killer, and the other witnesses went to ground. Cornell was still alive when he arrived at the London hospital. The firm left the manor for a pub in Walthamstow. In Ronnie's mind, they were his troops, and he was their colonel.
Getting bulletins from a nurse in London hospital, and she said, this guy is not dead. He'd been shot in the head with a 9mm bullet. He's still alive. It was early hours of the morning anyway when we heard, came on the news that he is dead. And the cheer went up in the pub. Imagine that. The colonel cheered first, and then everybody else joined in. Look, I'm with you, sir, you know. Cheer because a man's dead there, and dead, that's it. That's the sort of life it was.
Their names were Ronnie and Reggie. They were twins, and as they grew, they came to understand the power of fear. They were the Krays, and their story is terrifying, because it is true. Gary and Martin Kemp star as the Krays.
The media loves the Krays. They've made more money selling their story from prison than they ever made as gangsters. In the razzmatazz that surrounds the twins to this day, their cold-blooded murders have been sanitised. People who were children during the Krays' reign of terror campaigned for their release. Back in the 60s, once the twins' violence had escalated to murder, hardened members of the firm realised they were completely out of control. They might even turn against their own.
The twins wouldn't send a stranger to get you, because they know you'd either do the stranger or you wouldn't show. So the person who's going to come for you is your partner. So we had a little arrangement that if he used my first name, Albert, that's a warning, and vice versa. You know. Which, like to anyone accompanying them, if he knocked at my door and said, it's only me, Albert, no problem. Don't sound like a signal, but it is. You know. And that way I'd come flying out the window with a shooter in my hand or something. You know.
As the instinct for self-preservation took over, the firm's main men considered murdering the twins.
When something would happen, it would be, could have done that fat bastard last night. You know. We used to call them Gert and Daisy, the two, Reggie and Ronnie. But Ronnie was vulnerable because when we're going somewhere in the car, he had to sit in the passenger seat. People with Ronnie just sitting behind him, just take him through the tunnel and boom, he's gone. You know. Chuck him out the other side or take him somewhere and bury him, burn him. The problem, as we saw it, was not the twins, it was after that. If we want to carry on, we've got to build up a new fear. Plus we've got to handle very likely arrest for the actual murder of the twins. But they were definitely as much on the list as we were.